I wanted to share two specific translations, but before I do that, let me say we were talking at lunch about how important and crucial translation is in the forming of our poetics and our own evolution and journey as poets. When I was a student at the University of California at Berkeley, I turned to translating classical Chinese poems because when I read the poems in English translation, the diction felt antiquated, the images seemed obscured, it just seemed so far away. And I have to say as preface that my own Chinese is actually very poor. I write out character by character, stroke by stroke, the poems that I'm translating, and that practice has been really helpful to me because in writing out a Chinese character stroke by stroke, I'm slowing things down. We talked this morning about even stopping things in a poem, but that sort of interior motion is really important to me. And then if I'm writing out the characters of a Li Bo poem, for instance, I get to think about how certain radicals or root parts of characters are being repeated, to think about the kinds of rhythms and cadences. I get to personalize it. So for me, translation is in a way the most intimate form of reading, the most concentrated form, and it's also vital to my process of creation. I find, I don't know if it's true for both of you, but when I'm sometimes thinking about what can I do next as a poet, that's a really good time for me to translate someone else's work and sort of step into someone else's sort of imaginative worldview. So I just want to, by contrast, share a classical poem and then a modern poem, and then maybe pass it back to you for discussion. So here's a poem by Li Bai called Drinking Alone with the Moon, and I can't really read it in Chinese. You would have to hear it chanted, but it's 5 characters to a line, and you can feel how it's constructed with couplets. Among the flowers with a jug of wine, I pour alone, lacking companions, and raising cup, invite the bright moon. Facing my shadow makes 3 people, but the moon is unable to drink, and my shadow just follows my body. For a time, the moon leads the shadow. Be joyous as long as it's spring. I sing and the moon wavers. I dance and the shadow stumbles. When sober, we were intimate friends. Now drunk, each of us separates. May we be bound in travel without anxieties. May we meet in the far Milky Way. I mean, poems are untranslatable, and I always think of the Italian phrase, translators, traitors, which I've always liked because any translator is aware, I think you're aware of loss as well as renewal. And so in my early years, I liked translating those Tang poems because they had a kind of purity, a kind of intensity and clarity, which I still value as a poet. But I also got to the point where, and this is where a lot of modern Chinese poets would agree, that world is too hermetic, is too sifted out. You can only do so much with plum blossoms and wine and moon, and how about muddying the waters a little bit, and how about making a translation that's slightly muddy so that one is aware of that as an active translation. So just by contrast, here's a prose poem by a contemporary poet named Xi Chuan. His pseudonym Xi Chuan means Western River or rivers. And he feels like he learned his voice and his poetics through looking at Western poetry. And his best poems are really written as prose poems. He told me that if he tries to write in lines, he feels constricted even by that huge tradition that's there. But if he's writing as a kind of prose poem, he's freer to invent the rhythms, and the syntax is looser. And a last comment I would say is, Xi Chuan said, for those who are Chinese speaking, it's hard for a Westerner to realize that the distance between contemporary Chinese and classical ancient Chinese is as great as the difference between contemporary Chinese and a foreign language. It is so far removed because the vocabulary, the syntax, there's so many things that are different. But I loved this poem of Sichuan's, and I worked really hard on it, and my Chinese is very poor, but I had the advantage of sitting down with him at one point and going through character by character. And it's an ekphrastic poem. It's called After Wang Shimeng's Blue and Green Horizontal Landscape Scroll, 1,000 miles of rivers and mountains. So you can see how far away this is from Li Bai. Green colors and blue colors flow together and form empty mountains. Some people are walking in them, but they're still empty mountains, as if the people walking there have no faces, but they are still people. No one should try to recognize themselves in these figures or try to see the real mountains and waters of this world. Nor should anyone think of trying to gain casual praise from Wang Shimeng. Wang Shimeng knows these small figures and that not one is he himself. These are not his figures, and he cannot call out a single one by name. The figures acquire the mountains and waters, just as the mountains acquire the emerald and lapis, just as the waters acquire vastness and boats, just as Emperor Huizong got Wang Shimeng at 18 years old, not knowing that Wang would die soon after he finished this 1,000 miles of rivers and mountains. The mountains and waters are nameless. Wang Shimeng realizes that people without names are just decorations in mountains and waters, just as flying birds know they are insignificant to men's games, and the birds meet in the sky. Meanwhile, people walking in the mountains have their own directions to travel and their own plans. These small figures in white walk, sit at leisure, go fishing, trade, surrounded by green colors and blue colors. Just like today, people in black go to banquets, concerts, and funerals, surrounded by golden colors and more golden colors. These small figures in white have never been born, and so they have never died. Just like Wang Shimeng's landscape Utopia, they are immune to pollution and invasion, and that is worth careful consideration. So people who are far away from social controls have no need to long for freedom, and people who haven't been destroyed by experience aren't concerned about forgetting. Wang Shimeng let the fishermen have infinite numbers of fishes to go fishing. He allowed limitless waters to run out from the mountains. According to him, happiness means the exact amount of blessing, so that immersed in the silence between mountains and waters, people can build bridges, water wheels, roads, houses, and live quietly. Just like the trees growing appropriately in the mountains, along the margins of water, or surrounding a village and surrounding people. In the distance, the trees are like flowers. When they sway, it's the time when the clear wind is rising. When the clear wind is rising, it's time for people to sing. When people sing, it's time for an empty mountain to become an empty mountain. So you can feel how different that is in syntax and stretch and extension to the classical Chinese poem. And so I present those as sort of two poles that I've learned from, and my own sort of journey as a translator and poet has been to sort of start with that crystalline and pure, but really to extend and expand.